Hi guys, welcome back. This is Miss Knight continuing with Chapter 11 of Lord of the Flies and picking up halfway through Chapter 11. And as I read, I want students to have post-its out, consider what major symbols do you see in this chapter and how are those symbols used, and then what does that use kind of suggest about the thing that those symbols symbolize, like the larger idea. The conch is the big one here, the most important one, but there are others as well. And I'm picking up from the bottom of page 174, top of page 175 in most of our copies, and it's there's not a break in the page, but it's right after the boys arrive at Castle Rock, and someone, it's Roger, says, "Halt, who goes there?" Ralph bent back his head and glimpsed Roger's dark face at the top. "You can see who I am," he shouted. "Stop being silly." He put the conch to his lips and began to blow. Savages appeared, painted out of recognition, edging round the ledge towards the neck. They carried spears and disposed themselves to defend the entrance. Ralph went on blowing and ignored Piggy's terrors. Roger was shouting, "You mind out, see?" At length, Ralph took his lips away and paused to get his breath back. His first words were a gasp, but audible, calling an assembly. The savages guarding the neck muttered among themselves, but made no motion. Ralph walked forwards a couple steps. A voice whispered urgently behind him, "Don't leave me, Ralph." "You kneel down," said Ralph sideways, "and wait till I come back." He stood halfway along the neck and gazed at the savages intently. Freed by the paint, they had tied their hair back and were more comfortable than he was. Ralph made a resolution to tie his own back afterwards. Indeed, he felt like telling them to wait and doing it there and then, but that was impossible. The savages sniggered a bit, and one gestured at Ralph with his spear. High above, Ralph took his hands off the lever and leaned out to see what was going on. The boys on the neck stood in a pool of their own shadow, diminished to shaggy heads. Piggy crouched, his back shapeless as a sack. So we're going to see Roger a few times. He's up higher than the boys. He's on the ledge with that big rock. He's kind of guarding the entrance from up there. And he's got the lever that can make the rock kind of crash down onto this little neck of land that connects the main island to Castle Rock. And so he's up there guarding, and as he looks down, you notice that he doesn't really see the other boys as human. He sees the other savage boys as shaggy heads, diminished to shaggy heads, and then Piggy is shapeless as a sack. And we'll see him look down a couple times and not really register the other boys as human people, which might just kind of be how Roger sees people in general. "I'm calling an assembly." Silence. Roger took up a small stone and flung it between the twins, aiming to miss. They started, and Sam only just kept his footing. Some source of power began to pulse in Roger's body. Remember, we've talked before about why do the boys hunt? Why do they do this? It's this power. It's control over other people. And so he's kind of feeling that come up in him. Ralph spoke again loudly. "I'm calling an assembly." He ran his eye over them. "Where's Jack?" The group of boys stirred and consulted. A painted face spoke with the voice of Robert. I really love the way that he writes that. It's not Robert speaking, it's a painted voice is speaking. Whoever Robert was, this boy is not that anymore. "He's hunting, and he said we weren't to let you in." "I've come to see about the fire," said Ralph, "and about Piggy's specs." The group in front of him shifted, and laughter shivered outwards among them, light, excited laughter that went echoing among the tall rocks. A voice spoke from behind Ralph. "What do you want?" The twins made a bolt past Ralph and got between him and the entry. He turned quickly. Jack, identifiable by personality and red hair, was advancing from the forest. A hunter crouched on either side. All three were masked in black and green. Behind them on the grass, the headless and paunched body of a sow lay where they had dropped it. Piggy wailed, "Ralph, don't leave me!" With ludicrous care he embraced the rock, pressing himself to it above the sucking sea. The sniggering of the savages became a loud, derisive jeer. Jack shouted above the noise, "You go away, Ralph. You keep to your end. This is my end and my tribe. You leave me alone." The jeering died away. "You pinched Piggy's specs," said Ralph breathlessly. You've got to give them back. Got to? Who says? Ralph's temper blazed out. I say, you voted me for chief. Didn't you hear the conch? You played a dirty trick. We'd have given you fire if you'd asked for it. The blood was flowing in his cheeks, and the bunged-up eye throbbed. You could have had fire whenever you wanted, but you didn't. You came sneaking up like a thief and stole Piggy's glasses. Say that again. Thief! Thief! Piggy screamed. Ralph, mind me! Jack made a rush and stabbed at Ralph's chest with his spear. Ralph sensed the position of the weapon from the glimpse he caught of Jack's arm and put the thrust aside with his own butt. Then he brought the end round and caught Jack a stinger across the ear. They were chest to chest, breathing fiercely, pushing and glaring. Who's the thief? You are! Jack wrenched free and swung at Ralph with his spear. By common consent, they were using the spears as sabers now, no longer daring the lethal points. The blow struck Ralph's spear and slid down to fall agonizingly on his fingers. Then they were apart once more, their positions reversed. Jack towards the castle rock, and Ralph on the outside towards the island. Both boys were breathing very heavily. Come on, then. Come on. Truculently, they squared up to each other, but kept just out of fighting distance. You come on, and see what you get. You come on. Piggy, clutching the ground, was trying to attract Ralph's attention. Ralph moved, bent down, kept a wary eye on Jack. Ralph, remember what we came for, the fire, my specs. Ralph nodded. He relaxed his fighting muscles, stood easily, and grounded the butt of his spear. Jack watched him inscrutably through his paint. Ralph glanced up at the pinnacles, then towards the group of savages. Listen, we've come to say this. First, you've got to give back Piggy's specs. If he hasn't got them, he can't see. You aren't playing the game. The tribe of painted savages giggled, and Ralph's mind faltered. He pushed his hair up and gazed at the green and black mask before him, trying to remember what Jack looked like. Piggy whispered, And the fire! Oh, yes. Then about the fire. I say this again. We've been saying it ever since we dropped in. He held out his spear and pointed at the savages. Your only hope is keeping the signal fire going as long as there's light to see. Then maybe a ship will notice the smoke and come and rescue us and take us home. But without that smoke, we've got to wait till some ship comes by accident. We might wait years, till we're old. The shivering, silvery, unreal laughter of the savages sprayed out and echoed away. A gust of rage shook Ralph. His voice cracked. Don't you understand, you painted fools? Sam, Eric, Piggy, and me, we aren't enough. We tried to keep the fire going, but we couldn't. And then you, playing at hunting. He pointed past them to where the trickle of smoke dispersed in the pearly air. Look at that! Call that a signal fire? That's a cooking fire. Now you'll eat, and there'll be no smoke. Don't you understand? There may be a ship out there. He paused, defeated by the silence and the painted anonymity of the group guarding the entrance. I'm going to pause right there. We see a lot in this scene of, there's almost no talking. The only words from the savages themselves are when Robert says that Jack told them not to let them in. But everything else, it's jeering, they're giggling, they've got that shivering, silvery, unreal laughter. It's very eerie and very creepy. And it's comparing that with Ralph trying to make this like logical speech about why they need to come back and rejoin Ralph's group. It's just, there's a complete lack of connection there. We've got Jack's tribe who has gone to, like, lost all of their humanity. It's as if they can't speak anymore. They're basically animals at this point. And Ralph trying to use a language that they can barely even understand anymore to convince them. Not that they don't speak English anymore, but that the idea of rescue and signal fires and going back to civilization, it just doesn't compute for them. Jack opened a pink mouth and addressed Samneric, who were between him and his tribe. You two, get back. No one answered him. The twins, puzzled, looked at each other, while Piggy, reassured by the cessation of violence, stood up carefully. Jack glanced back at Ralph and then at the twins. Grab them. No one moved. Jack shouted angrily, I said grab them! The painted group moved round Samneric nervously and unhandily. Once more the silvery laughter scattered. Samneric protested out of the heart of civilization. Oh, I say! Honestly! Their spears were taken from them. Tie them up! I think this is a really good part because I think the way that Samneric protest is a little bit silly. Not that it's funny that they're being tied up, but like I was just saying, the savages aren't, they're basically mute at this point. They aren't speaking except for Jack, and their speech seems completely irrelevant to what they're doing, and not very likely to make them pity Samneric. And the words that Samneric used to protest are like the most British words. Oh, I say. And honestly, it's like hard to say it even without an accent. The most British words ever. And they're words that lack all meaning. Like, that doesn't mean anything. To say honestly, it doesn't have a meaning. To say, oh, I say, it doesn't have a meaning. So, whereas we've got the savages acting with clear intention and clear meaning behind their actions, but no words. And then we've got Samneric, and they don't really have any, they're talking, they're speaking, but their speaking doesn't have any meaning except that they protest. It's a little bit of irony there, and it just shows that they don't speak each other's language. And it leads to, it contributes to the savages' willingness to go along with tying Samneric up, right? Because they're unwilling at first. When Jack says, grab him, they don't want to do it. And then as Samneric continue to be outside of the group and clearly not a part of the savages, they're more willing to do violence to them. Their spears were taken from them. Tie them up! Ralph cried out hopelessly against the black and green mask. Jack! Go on, tie them. Now the painted group felt the otherness of Samneric, felt the power in their own hands. So here we see the savages, and they're like, okay, they're not part of us, they're not one of us, so it's okay to do this to them. This kind of calls back to the beginning of the chapter when they were discussing, when Piggy, Ralph, and Samneric were discussing how they were going to approach Jack's tribe, and Samneric wanted to put on face paint. They remembered the power that the face paint holds, and they kind of had this idea that it was better to kind of fit in and assimilate to the tribe to protect themselves. Whereas Roger was like, no, we need to show them that civilization is stronger and what they're missing and what rescue can look like. But that actually, I think, in the end harms them because their otherness is made clear. They felled the twins clumsily and excitedly. Jack was inspired. He knew that Ralph would attempt a rescue. He struck in a humming circle behind him, and Ralph was only just parried the blow. Beyond them, the tribe and the twins were a loud and writhing heap. Piggy crouched again. Then the twins lay, astonished, and the tribe stood round them. Jack turned to Ralph and spoke between his teeth. See, they do what I want. There was silence again. The twins lay, inexpertly tied up, and the tribe watched Ralph to see what he would do. He numbered them through his fringe, glimpsed the ineffectual smoke. His temper broke. He screamed at Jack. You're a beast, and a swine, and a bloody, bloody thief. He charged. Jack, knowing this was the crisis, charged too. They met with a jolt and bounced apart. Jack swung with his fist at Ralph and caught him on the ear. Ralph hit Jack in the stomach and made him grunt. Then they were facing each other again, panting and furious, but unnerved by each other's ferocity. They became aware of the noise that was the background to this fight, the steady, shrill cheering of the tribe behind them. Piggy's voice penetrated to Ralph. Let me speak. He was standing in the dust of the fight, and as the tribe saw his intention, the shrill cheer changed to a steady booing. Piggy held up the conch, and the booing sagged a little, then came up again to his strength. I got the conch, he shouted. I tell you, I got the conch. Surprisingly, there was silence now. The tribe was curious to hear what amusing thing he might have to say. Silence and pause, but in this silence of a curious air noise, close by Ralph's head. He gave it half his attention, and there it was again, a faint zoop. Someone was throwing stones. Roger, of course. Roger was dropping them, his one hand still on the lever. Below him, Ralph was a shock of hair, and Piggy a bag of fat. So again, really dehumanizing. He doesn't see them as people. Yeah. I've got this to say. You're acting like a crowd of kids. The booing rose and died again as Piggy lifted the white magic shell. Which is better, to be a pack of painted Indians like you are, or to be sensible like Ralph is? So that's really racist. I'm not trying to suggest that, I don't know what Golding's trying to do. It sounds like he is trying to suggest this. But I'm not trying to suggest that Native Americans of any sort are like savage, evil people who don't have morals in their society. And that's just the kind of racist thing you can enjoy when you read an old book. But please don't interpret it that way, because that's not true. A great clamor rose among the savages. Piggy shouted again, "Which is better, to have rules and agree, or to hunt and kill?" Again the clamor, and again, zoop. Ralph shouted against the noise, "Which is better, law and rescue, or hunting and breaking things up?" Now Jack was yelling too, and Ralph could no longer make himself heard. Jack had backed right against the tribe, and they were a solid mass of menace that bristled with spears. The intention of a charge was forming among them, and they were working up to it, and the neck would be swept clear. Ralph stood facing them, a little to one side, his spear ready. By him stood Piggy, still holding out the talisman, the fragile, shining beauty of the shell. This is the third time it's been described as fragile. That is important. The storm of sound beat at them, an incantation of hatred. High overhead, Roger, with a sense of delirious abandonment, leaned all his weight on the lever. Ralph heard the great rock long before he saw it. He was aware of a jolt in the earth that came to him through the soles of his feet and the breaking sound of stones at the top of the cliff. Then the monstrous red thing bounded across the neck, and he flung himself flat, while the tribe shrieked. The rock struck Piggy a glancing blow from chin to knee. The conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. Piggy, saying nothing, with no time for even a grunt, traveled through the air sideways from the rock, turning over as he went. The rock bounded twice and was lost in the forest. Piggy fell 40 feet and landed on his back across that square red rock in the sea. His head opened, and stuff came out and turned red. Piggy's arms and legs twitched a bit, like a pig's after it has been killed. Then the sea breathed again in a long, slow sigh. The water boiled white and pink over the rock, and when it went, sucking back again, the body of Piggy was gone. This time the silence was complete. Ralph's lips formed a word, but no sound came. Suddenly, Jack bounded out from the tribe and began screaming wildly, See, that's what you'll get! I meant it! There isn't a tribe for you anymore! The conch is gone!" He ran forward, stooping. "I'm chief!" Viciously, with full intention, he hurled his spear at Ralph. The point tore the skin and flesh over Ralph's ribs, then sheared off and fell into the water. Ralph stumbled, feeling not pain but panic, and the tribe, screaming now like the chief, began to advance. Another spear, a bent one that would not fly straight, went past his face, and one fell from on high where Roger was. The twins lay hidden behind the tribe, and the anonymous devils' faces swarmed across the neck. Ralph turned and ran. A great noise as of seagulls rose behind him. He obeyed an instinct that he did not know he possessed, and swerved over the open space so that the spears went wide. He saw the headless body of the sow, and jumped in time. Then he was crashing through foliage and small boughs, and he was hidden by the forest. The chief stopped by the pig, turned, and held up his hands. Back to the fort. Presently the tribe returned noisily to the neck, where Roger joined them. The chief spoke to him angrily. "Why aren't you on watch?" Ralph looked at him gravely. "I just came down." The hangman's horror clung round him. The chief said no more to him, but looked down at Samneric. So Roger now he's separate from the other boys. They all participated in the killing of Simon, but Roger, completely soberly, not kind of caught up in any sort of the madness, and single-handedly has killed Piggy, and that sets him apart from the others. The chief said no more to him, but looked down at Samneric. "You got to join the tribe. You let me go, and me." The chief snatched up one of the few spears that were left and poked Sam in the ribs. "What do you mean by it, eh? said the chief fiercely. "What do you mean by coming with spears? What do you mean by not joining my tribe?" The prodding became rhythmic. Sam yelled. "That's not the way." Roger edged past the chief, only just avoiding pushing him with his shoulder. The yelling ceased, and Samneric lay looking up in quiet terror. Roger advanced upon them as one wielding a nameless authority. All right, so Roger is a psychopath, and we see him here have this instinctive knowledge of how to torture and how to hurt people. Almost something you could compare to Roger's sort of instinctive and growing understanding of leadership and what it means to be a leader. Roger just knows that's not the way. Like, I know how to instill pain and create fear and terror. And he really is able, under this new reign of Jack, who he described as an irresponsible authority last chapter, he's able to come in and live out his dark fantasies and hurt people the way that he has never before been able to do. So we are not in a great place at this point in the book. All right, guys, we have one more chapter left.